We're starting today the annual conference on China program of the Institute for National Security Studies, INSS, in Tel Aviv. We are still living with the COVID affection on our life, so we have to do it by virtual meeting this year, but I hope that next year we have a real meeting. And our special guest, Jane Sun, not only sitting in Shanghai, but could come to visit us here in Israel. This special guest, Jane Sun, she is a long-time personal and family friend and a long-time friend of Israel and the Jewish people. And I'm very happy that we have here with you today, and we are eager to listen to you. But before I'm starting, I want to share with you something about this institute. INSS is the #1 most important research institute on strategic matters in Israel. INSS is engaged in innovative, relevant, high-quality research that shape the public discourse in a variety of issues on Israel's national security agenda and provide policy analysis and recommendation to decision makers. I can tell you that by the end of this month, by the end of this year, the head of the Institute, Major General Yaglin, will submit our strategic assessment to the President of Israel. So you can understand how much this influential, this institute. INSS is very much supported by, this is an independent institute, and I want to thank our supporters that allow the institute to continue operate independently and to give relevant policy recommendation to our leadership. And in this regard, in this respect, I want to take the opportunity to thank Diane and Guilford Glazer Philanthropies that support the China program that I am part of it and this unique event today. China program in INSS is an exclusive research program on China and Israel with experts who used to live and work in China. And we are trying to give a better understanding on China, and the phase before the Israel is the challenging relating to our China policy. Now, I'm very much privileged to have you, Jane, and I would like to say a few words about you, if I may. Jane Sun, Executive Officer of Trip.com. She first joined the company as Chief Financial Officer in 2005, later serving as the Chief Operating Officer and the Co-President before moving into the CEO role in 2016. In this year since Jane Sun joined, Trip.com has experienced significant increase in its market capitalization, growing from about $1 billion to more than $20 billion, and has continued to rapidly expand its global footprint. As the only female CEO in China high-tech industry, Jane Sun proactively advocates gender equality and has made it a mission to empower women to achieve balance and success in both their career and family lives. At Trip.com, female employees represent over half of the total workforce and a third of senior management. And I witnessed this when I visit you and I saw how many women you have under your leadership. Jane Sun is a well-respected for extensive experience in operating and managing online travel businesses, merger and acquisitions, and she received numerous praises for her work in the industry. She is an International Chamber of Commerce, ICC Executive Board member, a JP Morgan Asian Advisory Board member, Vice Chair of the World Travel and Tourism Council, and so on and so forth. I have a long list, but I don't want to waste our time. I want now to tell our audience that this is a big privilege to listen to you, and we would like to get your experience of what we witnessed last year and how do you see our life and our cooperation in 2021. Please, Jane, the microphone is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel great honor to be able to speak to all the audience. And I love to invite all of you to come and visit us in Shanghai when everything returns normal. You and I had a long partnership and friendship when he stayed in Shanghai as the consul of Israel. And we Chinese people love to visit Israel. It's so rich in history. My family, my parents, my kids, my husband all love Israel. And we even took lots of visitors to come and visit your beautiful country. So hopefully after the COVID, we will be able to resume the visiting routes to your beautiful country. Now, let me also give you a quick update of what we did in the past couple of months, and what we are doing, and what we will do in this challenging environment. As you know, China was the first country which got hit by COVID-19 when our government decided to lock down Wuhan and lock down the borders. It was very challenging for the travel industry. So very quickly, we established a 2 billion natural disaster relief fund for our consumers to return, change, and delay their trips. And as you know, it was right before the Chinese New Year. Millions of customers were planning to go abroad to visit Israel, visit Europe, visit Australia, New Zealand, etc. So it was very difficult for these travelers. So we feel as a customer-centric company, we should take on the responsibility to take care of our consumers. So the 2 billion natural disaster relief fund was very helpful to calm down the anxiety for our customers. The second thing what we did is partnership. We also need to take good care of the partners within the travel industry. So we established a 1 billion partnership fund and also injected 10 billion small loans with the help of our banking network to help the small and medium-sized business. So through these joint efforts, we were able to sustain the ecosystem that's working with us. And the third one is for our employees. Our chairman and I volunteered to take zero salary. And our VPs volunteered to take 50% of our salary. And our workforce were able to work 4 days and stay 1 day at home to make sure our cost is very well under control. So for the first quarter, we suffered a loss of 1.2 billion. The second quarter, we immediately cut the loss to 100 million. And the third month, we were able to generate 1.6 billion cash flow in our business. So that's what we did in the past. And then in order to lead the recovery in the travel industry in China, what we did is we joined our customers to establish a safety network. All the partners, including hotels, airlines, rental cars, tour operators, need to fulfill certain requirements in order to join us for the safety network. So, for example, they need to provide masks, hand sanitation, and make sure the environment is very safe. And secondly, we also make sure we update all the countries for their inbound requirement, and it's updated on a very timely basis. And thirdly, we also made our reservation system available so that for certain museums reservations, we can make a reservation online to avoid the crowds. And very lastly, we work with certain museums such as Louvre, Forbidden City in China, to make sure we have an online museum system so the kids, without going to these countries, at least we can educate these kids for doing that. So I very much love to work with the government of Israel to promote your sites before the border opens. And we have already seen huge pent-up demand. I'm sure once the vaccine is available, Chinese consumers will be very interested in visiting the Middle East. And I love to prepare for that, for your beautiful country. Now, going forward, there are lots of things we can do. In China, what we've noticed are the 3 trends. First of all, as we discussed, consumers pay lots of attention to safety. So lots of museums and tour operators are joining us for the safety network. And whoever can secure the safety for consumers will get lots of volume. The second thing is people prefer to travel with smaller tour group rather than traveling with 40 people who they have never met with. Now they much prefer to travel with smaller groups, friends they know well, family members they know well. So from doing that, they are able to feel much secured. So our customized tour gets a lot of attraction. And third one is they also prefer to travel with flexible packages, such as cancelable, changeable tickets, cancelable, changeable hotel rooms, gets lots of volume. So these are the trends. I think we can work very closely with our partners in Israel to make sure it is satisfying for the new trend. Now, going forward, we have lots of things we can do. First of all, before the board is open, we can do a lot of pre-education for your beautiful country. Present the beautiful historical sites to the upcoming visitors. And secondly, we use live stream to do destination marketing for the hotels, for your museums. So the live stream format is very popular in China, which enable us to reach out to the new and fast-growing market in China. And thirdly, for the hotels and travel destinations which have very limited volume, we're able to utilize our network to give a good discount for the population so that the hotels and the travel destinations will be able to get some cash flow to help them with the maintenance of the sites. And that also stimulates the demand into this very much pent-up demand into this market. And once the volume is up, then the ADRs for these travel destinations, tour operators will be able to improve. So this is the trend we have seen in China. At the very difficult time, the airlines were flying people from Shanghai to Beijing for $10. At the beginning, they were losing money running this operation, but gradually people's confidence start to increase and very well into the future. They are ready to grow very nicely for the full price right now. So I'm very much looking forward to working with the travel industry in Israel and drive the volume into a beautiful country. I think we also would love to invite people from Israel to visit China. It is a country with lots of dynamics, lots of innovation. And I think I feel very closely with the community in Israel. I'm sure the two nations will work out a very good way to support each other as we did during the Second World War. Now we are facing new challenges. I'm sure these two countries with brilliant people, with the new generation, will work very well and support each other into the new area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. I have many questions that raised by the people who were looking to listen to you and to see you. The first question I have, how will you define the characteristic of Chinese tourists traveling during the COVID-19? Do they spend more on holiday or try to keep it simple and look for discount due to the economic situation? Do they still prefer to stay close to home, or they ready already to explore far region of China? And how they feel this kind of change of not going to Paris for the weekend, but to go to other places in China for the weekend?
I think right now China is very safe. And also when you return from foreign country, the government imposed 14 days quarantine time. So before the vaccine is made available to the major population, I think travel within domestic China will be the case. However, when you look at our sites, our search volume for Middle East, Europe, United States, Australia, New Zealand already are rising very quickly. So the pent-up demand is very strong. So what we need to happen is for the scientists to really make a breakthrough. For example, if a consumer took the vaccine, they probably will be immune from the virus when they travel abroad. But when they come back, because they are not infected by this disease, if the scientists can confirm that these people also do not need to be quarantined for 14 days or even shorten the quarantine period, that will be very helpful because we have limited vacation time. Nobody can afford to take an overseas travel for 2 weeks and come back, be locked down for 2 weeks. So that's something we need to really monitor very carefully in the breakthrough of the science field. Once that's done, I think people will feel free to travel and no quarantine is necessary. And I feel after the lockdown, the pent-up demand will be very strong. So we just need to make sure our system is robust enough to handle the pent-up demand.
I know that your company dealt with online issue much longer before the COVID. How do you see this kind of system change because of the fact that people have to work more in a remote way? So how do you feel that it is shaping your company way of working with the people?
Yeah, online travel definitely has its advantage because we're able to reach out to a much broader audience. However, the offline partners is really the substance for people to travel to. So we need to be very supportive of each other, making sure all the information is disseminated into the offline system. So the customer knows where are the sites that is open, that's safe. But on the other hand, we also need to support our partner to let them know the volume we are expecting during the Chinese New Year, during the Golden Week holidays. So they need to make sure the inventory and the transportation is available for these pent-up demand.
Thank you very much. I think that what is very important for me and for us in Israel to understand that what are the crucial changes that you see in the next few years due to the COVID affection? How do you see this kind of obstacle? How we overcome this obstacle? And what is your vision to deal with this obstacle, these great changes that happened due to what we foreseen this year?
I think first of all is the border control. And the border control will not be lifted until the vaccine is made available for the majority of the consumers. But I'm very confident with the collaboration for the scientists all over the world, we will be able to have the vaccine in mass production very soon. I talked to a few experts in the United States. Their expectation is in middle of year next year, maybe 60% of the population will be injected with vaccine. And I'm sure the scientists in Israel will also pay lots of attention and make sure the population is very well protected. In China, our government is very efficient. I'm sure they will make the mass production available for the majority of the population. So that's the first thing, the vaccine. The second thing is also for the scientists to have a confirmation that the travelers, when they go abroad, they will be protected. When they return, they do not need to be locked down. That's also very important. Lack of one of these won't be enough for us to promote cross-border travels. The third thing is, if these two preconditions is met, the pent-up demand is huge because people have been locked down for such a long time, and Chinese people love to travel. The Confucian's teaching is it's better to travel 10,000 miles than to read 10,000 books. So it's in the gene of Chinese people to explore, to learn through travel. when I took my kids to Israel, the kids learn so much more than just staying at home reading books. And through talking, through visiting Einstein Museum in Hebrew University, when they go to the West Wall, they learn about the culture. We went to a Jewish family and we had a dinner with the family. That's how they appreciate the culture. I think that's the most efficient way, effective way for kids to understand each other, learn about the history. So we love to bring the Chinese families and Chinese kids to visit your beautiful country.
Thank you very much. We're really looking forward to see you back with your family and many tourists coming to Israel. Now I got some question relating to the fact that you, in your management and in your company, you filled with women at the top position. And the question is that I got, how it's affect the general environment of the workplace? Do you think it's contribute to the resilience of the company during this devastating crisis? And if you think we shall see more women managers in China and in other places in the future?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. We do quite a lot for female leadership because I'm the only female CEO in a major internet company. And our chairman also supports a lot for female leadership. So we do quite a lot. For example, when a female is pregnant, we offer taxi for free. When the baby is born, we give them 800 as a gift, 3,000 as education fee. When the female returns to work, we offer flexible working hours. And now I notice that more and more females are very talented. They're getting PhDs, master's degrees, and study overseas before they return to China. But as a female, the birth period has a limitation. So a lot of females are struggling with the question whether they should have baby first, the family first, or work first. So what we come up with a policy is that if they decide to have their eggs frozen, our company will pay for it. And that's a very progressive policy. And we are the first high-tech company and the only company in China who has this policy. And as a result, the female workers in C-TRIP exceed 50%. Middle managers, more than 40% of the middle managers are females, and more than 1/3 of the executives are females. And that number is even much better than the Silicon Valley high-tech companies. And I feel very proud of it. And females has lots of resilience in this crisis. You can see their strength is helping our company to go through this crisis. For example, females are very good with empathy. They always put themselves in other people's shoes, very good with cultivating the team, good with communication, and willingness to make personal sacrifice for the best interests of their team. And in this crisis, these strengths really help our company to go through the storm, weather the storm. So I very much encourage all the leaders, male or female, to really give the opportunity for the females to grow in your company. They will become a resilient workforce to support the business going forward.
It is very, very important, and thank you for your support for this kind of gender equality. I would like to move a bit to something that you are very much support of, and this is education and higher education. I know how much you committed to education, higher education. You are in the board of Jiatong University, and you support a lot of activities relating to education. And how do you see the future relations between China and United States affect the exchange of students between the two countries? I know how the numbers was so high before. So how do you see how it's affect? And what kind of ideas you have for Israel in this regard?
I love and admire Israel, a lot of scientists in Israel. There is a book about the innovative spirit in Israel. Almost every kid enjoy reading that book. So I think when I compare our family value, education between Israel versus China, there are lots of similarities. We can save all the money to give the kids best education. But I talked to the president of Hebrew University. I think the key difference between our family is that in China, our teaching is for the kids to respect their elderlies, respect authority. But in your country, something we really need to learn is that you also encourage kids to ask good questions, to question authority. So when I come back from my trip in Hebrew University, I was talking to many presidents, many educators, many mayors. I think that's something we really need to learn from your country, because only when you start to ask questions, you start to think and then start to innovate. So that's something we really need to learn a lot from your country. However, I think our two countries has such a great synergy. My husband was the first CTO of Alibaba. Now he is an investor. He invested in many Israeli companies such as Robot Team. And I think the Israeli engineers are very innovative. However, because Israel has millions of people versus China has 1.4 billion people, so the innovation we invented in Israel by the high-tech company can apply to a massive market in China, and the mass production is very advanced in China. So if we can team up with each other and fully utilize each other's strengths, it's a beautiful combination. So that's something Jai and I are learning, and we very much love to see a tighter partnership between Israel and China.
My last question, and this is really connecting to what you just mentioned about cooperation in technology, cooperation between businessmen, businesswomen from Israel and China. It is still, I feel, there is still conceptual gap between the Israeli businessmen and Chinese. And there is still kind of lack of understanding between sides. How do you feel we can close this gap in the future?
I think in reality, I feel very close to Israel. I think the basic value, hard work spirit, our attention to education, to the new generation, really are very, very similar. I think the only way you can bring these two communities together is really through travel, exchange, and then the students can maybe study in each country more so that they understand the background and culture well. And I very much would love to establish scholarships in different Hebrew universities and for the scholars to study in China more. So we understand each other and then we can support each other. But I deal with a lot in Israel business person. We made investment in a coding company, and one of my best friend, Ani, also was from Israel. And he established a venture with a Chinese teacher. It's called Leap Learner, and the kids learn about coding very well. It's a beautiful venture between Chinese teacher and Israeli engineer. It's very successful. So I'm sure in future there are lots of shared interests which we can maximize.
Wonderful. Listen. I couldn't expect more, and I really appreciate the time that you spent with us. I know how busy you are. We are looking forward to host you here in Israel, and we are looking forward to have more cooperation, more tourists from both sides going to each country. And I want to thank you, Jane, very much for this time, for this opportunity for the Israeli people to listen to you. I hope we have more in the future. And I hope that next year you come to our annual meeting by yourself, not only by this kind of virtual meeting. And again, thank you very much, and hope to meet in Israel or in Shanghai. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I look forward to visiting you in Israel and love to invite you to come back to China and visit us in Shanghai.
Thank you very much, Jane. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
We continue now our second part of this special event, the annual program of the China program in the INSS. As I mentioned before, China program is a unique program that understand better about China. And for this, we have a special friend, an old friend for many, many years. Since we came to Beijing in 1992, we met and learned a lot from this old friend, Ted Pflafker. So I want to welcome you to our live annual gathering here. And thank you very much, Ted, for joining us now for this special event.
Hello, Al. Good to see you, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, Ted, as I mentioned, is an old friend of us. And beside of this, he is one of the best people who knows about China. I can tell you what he mentioned to me in his short bio, but I have a lot to say more than this about Ted. Ted is a New Jersey native who studied Russian, but unexpectedly ended up in China when he arrived to Beijing in the spring of 1989. This is a very special occasion, very special time to arrive to China before June 1989, and has lived and worked here in Beijing as a journalist ever since. Ted is writing at the beginning for South China Morning Post, Boston Globe, Washington Post, but since 1994, he is contributing to The Economist and later became an accredited correspondent in the Beijing Bureau of The Economist, where he remains today. Starting in 2000, he served 3 times as the president of Touring Correspondent Club of China. And in 2007, he published his first book, Doing Business in China. And as he mentioned, that starting in 2008 and every year since, he has threatened to write another one. And we're really looking forward to your next book, because I believe that you have a lot to say to everybody, and mainly today to the Israeli audience. So I would like to have this half an hour with you, Ted. And if you can tell us a bit of what's going on in China with the aftermath of the COVID-19, how do you expect next year, and how it is affect the China-US relationship from your view in Beijing?
Thanks, Al. Well, I don't want to make all of you jealous, but life in China is almost back to normal and has been for quite a few months. And this has a huge effect on relations between China and all countries, but especially the US. As has the election, which I'd like to talk about a little also, the US election. As you were describing with Jane's son, many Chinese travelers who frequently run off to Europe or some other exciting place, people go to Turkey, people go to surfing in Indonesia and ballooning over Turkey and visiting South America. That's not open to them because of travel restrictions and quarantine requirements. So domestic travel in China is up quite a lot. I myself have been living, with the exception of international travel, the kind of life that makes a lot of my friends at home in the US and elsewhere in the world a little bit jealous. We have dozens of people over to our house for dinner. We go out to restaurants, we go to bars. This weekend I went to have a fun weekend off in the south of China to take a river cruise on a scenic mountain area in Guilin. My wife and I go off every few weekends just for fun. I travel for business. And apart from international travel, things are almost back to normal. Restaurants are full. On this weekend trip, I was in an auditorium for a big show with about 4,000 people, packed theater seating. Everyone wore masks. Everyone checks in with a code. Your travel history is followed. but it hardly slows you down, and things are very much normal. There are very few foreigners coming and going. It's very hard for foreigners who don't have a permanent residence permit to get in. Even if they're allowed in, they have to quarantine. Hard, solid, enforced 2-week quarantine. You are taken to a hotel room, you are locked in, they bring you food, whether you like it or not is up to you. You don't have a lot of choice. It's not wonderful, but it's bearable, and it's not optional. You are not allowed out of the room. And then once you clear your testing after 14 days, you're free to go. So the bar is high. A lot of people will not come in for a quick trip if they have to do 2 weeks of that first. So China is feeling a lot less engaged and integrated. There are just few foreigners around. People who were here when the outbreak opened up remained here. China's been quite flexible about allowing people to stay in, and that's been very much appreciated. They've been flexible towards people who got stuck here and whose visas weren't meant to last that long. Another thing you mentioned with Jane was the importance of educational exchange. That has always been a big bright spot in US-China relations. And unfortunately, partly because of COVID and partly because of deteriorating relations and paranoia and suspicion in the US about technology transfer, technology theft, IPR violations, even before the pandemic, there were restrictions going in place on Chinese academics and visa restrictions on Chinese party members, and in general, a very hostile and negative set of policies and a very negative environment. Education exchange had always been a bright spot. There have been other times when US and China have had tense relations, but the huge numbers of young people going in both directions for prolonged times, really getting to know each other and getting to appreciate each other, has had huge positive impact on the long-term outlook. These are young people who go and develop relationships and understanding and affection in both directions, and they go on to become leaders in business and government. And it's an intangible thing, very hard to measure, but I believe very important. And we're now losing out on that, partly because of restrictions on visas that were happening already, and partly because the traffic is basically shut down in both directions. So I think that's a shame. I could also, if you'd like, talk about the election. It's been a very hot topic here. I've been quite amazed at how closely a lot of Chinese people have followed the intricacies of the US election in the run-up and in the aftermath. They know more about the Electoral College and about the court challenges and about the states that split their electoral votes. Maine and Nebraska have their special district. People here, and I'm not just talking about international relations scholars, young people, people in all walks of life, city people in all walks of life. Chinese peasants are not paying such close attention, but a lot of people are paying really, really close attention. And there is some optimism that a change in US administration will help cool the temperature. There's also a sense that the structural problems are indeed structural and may not be so easy to solve. It's not like someone's waving a magic wand, Donald Trump goes away and everything gets better. There are structural issues there. The general consensus in both parties in the US has changed, largely, I would say, because of the pressure Trump has put. Ahead of the election, I think China was very split as to who it might have preferred to win. In one sense, Donald Trump was very good for China, in more than one sense. If you view him as a not so competent, not so organized leader who's very erratic and unpredictable and who was undermining US alliances and undermining US institutions and eroding some of the most fundamental advantages that the US has, its democratic institutions, some claim to some kind of moral high ground around the world. If you believe that, and you believe that Donald Trump has undermined that, and if you're China who believes in a zero-sum long-term game with the US, that's good. If Donald Trump is driving America off a cliff and we're a long-term competitor, that's good for us. If you believe in win-win and you think the world is better off, you might worry Donald Trump is driving the US off the cliff, and it's bad for the world and it's bad for China. But there's been a split between the win-win people and the zero-sum people. The zero-sum people thought, let Donald Trump go ahead and break things and break glass and break windows, and in the long run, it's better for China. They were very concerned about his erratic behavior, even before he took office, things we've already forgotten about, the way he made a phone call before taking office to the president of Taiwan huge breach of protocol, not clear whether he understood exactly what he was doing. The tariffs he put on China, the trade war. I was just speaking yesterday to a very influential Chinese scholar who said Donald Trump has done more than any Chinese leader could to unify the national spirit of the Chinese people. He continues to call COVID, the China virus. That riles people up here, the trade war, all of the accusations he makes, and this policy that is more or less an explicit call for regime change has riled up the government, has riled up Chinese diplomats, and has riled up the Chinese public in support of the government. So from the Chinese point of view, that's quite good. There's always the danger that the next erratic thing he does will be very disruptive, very dangerous, really cause problems. They've always been worried about the chance of an absolute crisis, serious crisis developing because of his turbulent style. In another sense, though, Joe Biden could cause more problems, less splashy, less attention-getting problems. There's one line of thinking in the US that Donald Trump wasn't wrong about everything, that China did need to be confronted, that the overall approach needed to be more confrontational, the US needed to be more assertive, do more to demand reciprocity, put more pressure on China, on trade, on the trade deficit, on intellectual property, on human rights, on the South China Sea, on all of these things, on Hong Kong, on Xinjiang and treatment of Uyghurs, and that the US needs to do this. Trump wasn't doing it in the most effective way. Yes, he has a trade war with China, but he's also got trade wars and tariffs with Canada, with South Korea, and with the EU, tariffs on Korean trucks and Canadian steel and Canadian timber and French cheese and German wine. And there's a sense that Biden might be a little bit more organized and strategic about this, restore alliances, calm down some of the turbulence with other partners, get other partners together, and approach China a little bit more in a more unified, organized way. That could be more effective. Trump has flailed around, but the U.S. trade deficit hasn't gone away. So it's riled up Chinese people, done very little to hurt China. And someone who does it in a more quiet but efficient way might actually bring more pressure to bear, which for China would be a problem. A slower, steadier, more efficient approach to confronting China or standing up to China might not suit their interests. So it's hard to tell. There is a lot of relief that the turbulence and the roller coaster ride is coming to an end. People are at least confident that it will go back to more normal rules of engagement where you can have some sense of where things are going and a sense that the officials you're speaking to have some standing to speak. Another big problem through the Trump years with China and with other countries was that whatever policy was, whatever your embassy said, whatever your ambassador may have said, whatever the undersecretary of whatever may have said, a Trump tweet the next morning blew it all up and you didn't know where you stood.
This is very important, everything you mentioned now relating to these very, very sensitive relations. I want you to take us deeper into the Chinese mind, the people mind. And if you can tell us about how the Chinese feel within themselves in the looking so closely to election process. What does it mean for them about what we call the democracy or election perception that they don't have the same in China? What do you feel from the people about this?
There are, of course, a wide range of views, but there are also some broad strands and a few very common broad threads. I don't detect a lot of envy. The main strand is not, oh, how wonderful that the US can do this and we can't. If people did feel that way, they wouldn't dare say it out loud, certainly not with me in the room. I mean, I should say the environment here is very, very tense. The scope for free expression. I've noticed this thing recently at dinner tables in rooms where you shouldn't expect that anyone is necessarily listening. People don't want to say Xi Jinping's name out loud. People call him, big brother, not in the Orwellian way. They call him Lao Da in Chinese, like, the oldest child, like the boss. They call him the big boss. They call him uncle, or all kinds of little nicknames that are mostly affectionate. People really stop themselves from saying his name out loud when you're sitting in some noodle restaurant. So what people are willing to say is not necessarily what people believe. The fascination has been sort of spectator sport. It is a fascinating process. In terms of comparing their systems, I think the more common view is that the chaos of the Trump years, the poor U.S. response to COVID, and the election, this kind of mess of an election aftermath that we've had, have made China's system look good by comparison. There's a lot of talk here about how the COVID response, China's response, has been the definitive nail in the coffin. You know, the argument is over about which system is superior. Obviously, the U.S. system, just whether it's because the quality of the people and they care more about their freedom and their individual rights than they care about society, or whether it's the nature of the government, which has the ability to really crack the whip and make things happen, or some combination. Obviously, China's system is better. Look what we've managed to do. We had the problem. We got on top of it. The people cooperated. The government knew what to do. The people listened and did what we told them. And here we are, more or less back to normal. And we have theaters full of thousands of people and planes full of tourists going everywhere except out of the country. I don't think it's so cut and dry. There are other countries with other systems that have come close to China's level. New Zealand, or maybe the best comparison is Taiwan, Vietnam also, but Taiwan, a Chinese society with a very different government, has had as much success in handling COVID. So the argument is not completely over as to the ultimate superiority of any system. I argue that there were a lot of factors in the early stages. China's mishandling of the early days, the first 3 weeks, was quite severe. This is coming out. China denies it. You get in big trouble here for saying it out loud, but it's true. They made big mistakes, entirely predictable, the sort of mistakes that China is set to make. The problems that the US is having, you can trace to characteristics in the system and the culture. In very much the same way in the early stages, China does not tolerate whistleblowers. China doesn't tolerate truth-telling. China doesn't want disruption. They don't want information being distributed anything but from the central authorized source. So when early credible sources, but not official sources, were talking about what was happening in Wuhan, they shut them down. They sent the police. They rounded people up and turned off the chat groups. They had a big political meeting going on that they didn't want to disrupt. So even when officials knew something was happening, they wanted to put it off a few days until this big meeting was over. All these sorts of things are just entirely predictable for the Chinese system. And afterwards, the Chinese system was able to respond in ways that it also is uniquely able to do. So I don't accept the idea that it proves the ultimate superiority of China's system. But it does prove some of its strengths. And I think it also illustrated some of its weaknesses. People here feel very satisfied. They look with a lot of pity. Go ahead.
When you speak about weaknesses of the Chinese system, do you see, or can we predict any kind of black swans like the COVID that could affect the CPC legitimacy later, 2021 or later on, including the fact that Xi Jinping don't working on kind of reshuffle of the government, that he continue at least until 2027 to be the head of the state?
Yes, and I mean, black swans, you don't know what they're going to be because they're rare and unusual. And one that I am concerned about is high-level elite political instability. It's because we know so little about what goes on. I think of the Chinese leadership as sort of a black box shark tank. I don't know how many sharks there are, whether it's dozens, a few score, maybe a couple of hundred very, very powerful people who come out of the military, out of the security services, out of the big state-owned industry sectors, the energy sector, the mining sector, things like that. There are powerful interests who are very unhappy with how Xi Jinping has handled things, how he has sort of taken over everything and put off all of the succession planning. We see very little. So it's something I'm on the lookout for, that instability at the elite top level is hard to assess. It is a black box, but it's something that one could imagine posing a big challenge. Any other sort of national level threat, whether it's a huge earthquake that they handle badly, another pandemic that they don't get on top of, could also It could also lead to problems. And I think all for the same reason. The one stress factor we really don't understand, we can't evaluate, is the stability in the inner core of leaders. Xi Jinping gave a speech very interesting about, he did mention black swans. He also said China needs to worry about gray rhinoceroses. A gray rhinoceros is your ordinary, regular, there's nothing surprising or unusual about it. It's big, it's dangerous, it's gray, it's what you expected, and it can come and run you over. So things that aren't so hard to imagine, things that are easily imagined. I think in that category, they put things like labor unrest, ethnic unrest that gets out of hand. It's hard to imagine, but so many things have happened in China and other places that were hard to imagine. They have such a close eye on anything developing in any of these areas, labor unrest, ethnic unrest. The surveillance now is so total and extreme. Cameras everywhere. Everyone lives most of their life on their cell phone, which is followed. It's very hard to surprise them, the authorities, with much of anything. The resources that have gone into security and surveillance are unbelievable. And one imagines that they are very likely to keep on top of anything and stay away from problems like that.
If we're talking about the economic situation and the gap between the cities and the villages, between poor and rich, this is something that you are concerned of?
Less concerned than I used to be. They've worked very hard at closing the gap, or at least not leaving the countryside entirely behind. It used to be the gap grew because the cities were charging along. The front of the train was moving fast and the back of the train just didn't go anywhere. There was no connection. So they've managed to connect the back of the train to the front of the train. And life in the countryside is improving. But again, with other stresses added in. A story I did a couple of months ago was about one of these big government campaigns to improve life in the countryside. And one of their schemes is to increase density, consolidate villages, put people into better housing. Instead of 6 little villages with single-story houses without plumbing, they knock down these villages and put people into little consolidated towns with apartment buildings with plumbing and electricity. And for some people, that's an improvement, and it's an improvement they'd like to make. For some people, they like their lifestyle. They like their community. They've been many generations. They farm. They live near their fields. Their life is what it is. They would like enough electricity to run a refrigerator. And if you could somehow set them up with some running water and proper toilets, they'd like that too. But they want to live in their village, in their old town. And you don't get a choice about it. So bulldozers come through. People get literally bulldozed. If they resist, they get taken away in handcuffs, driven away for a few hours while their house is bulldozed. And then they get told, maybe your new apartment is ready, maybe it's not. Very, very disruptive. So it's the weak spot in the system here. There's not a lot of consent and there's not a lot of consultation. And for a lot of people, things happen whether they like it or not. So you could argue that it's in the service of a good cause. And they put a lot, this year is the target for alleviating poverty. They finally claim by 2020, in the coming weeks, they will have alleviated absolute poverty, which they define as something like people living on $2 a day. But it still leaves people who are living on $5 a day and $8 a day. I've been to these places. They're really very poor. And for the most part, people in these places don't expect much from the government. The government has these schemes to provide finance. And if you go to a poor county, the county town, which looks like a small city, it has some streets and some traffic lights and a couple of buses. It's a proper town. That's the administrative center of very small villages. The money comes into the county. There's a few influential families who control the credit union and their party officials, and money somehow makes its way to their friends, and people in the villages never see it. A very touching remark came to me from a peasant in one of these poor villages when I asked how things have changed with the poverty alleviation campaign. Oh, things here never changed, he asked his old friend. When's the last time? Well, let's see, 1979, the village got wired up. We got electricity in 78, 79? That was good. That was a big deal. But since then, if we get a lot of rain, we have a good year. If we don't get rain, we have a bad year. We don't know who the leaders are. That makes no difference to us. I still think that's very much the case in the poorest places. But some of the smaller cities are coming along, and people are living much more consumer-oriented lifestyles. People are acquiring devices and toys and things large and small. It goes from, they're better phones to a washing machine to a car for people who 10 years ago could never have dreamed of owning such a thing.
Yeah, this is very, very interesting what you tell us. I want the last part of our meeting to talk about China foreign relations, how it's viewed from Beijing and how you see this. I know that you speak not only with Chinese, but also with foreign diplomats. And I would like to get, and this is a question that I got from the public, how do you see China-EU relations after the COVID or 2021 and later? And I want to add to it, what is the way that you see China-Middle East and China-Israel relations after the COVID with the way the Chinese perceive the world?
Well, China-EU first. Less turbulent than the US, but a lot of the same structural issues are there. The Huawei issue is a big issue. Technology transfer. Europe is doing more to implement an investment review process. The US has always had it, where central government, Treasury Department in the US has to approve Chinese investments in a lot of sectors. Europe is starting to build that kind of a system, which the Chinese won't like. They're more and more of their telecoms and energy projects will be scrutinized. But Europe also is, in one way, reciprocity is the organizing principle. They feel like it's been uneven. Access to the Chinese market has not been as good for Europe as it has been for Chinese to the European market. So they're working on reciprocity. There's a few sub-issues. A lot of Western Europe and the Chinese have a program, it's called 16+1 or 17+1 now, where they're trying to cultivate ties among European countries that came out of Eastern and Central Europe, the old Soviet bloc, some of the old Soviet republics, or the Eastern Europeans, the Poland and Slovakia and Bulgaria. China's trying to appeal to them on some level of some shared history. You know, we were socialist brothers in the 50s. We've always had special relations. The Romanian embassy in Beijing is one of the biggest buildings and one of the most beautiful spots near a park. In the 50s, Albania had a beautiful embassy. The Bulgarians had a beautiful embassy. And China's trying to appeal to this old heritage. We used to be socialist brothers. We have a long relationship. Come on, are you from... Polish diplomat once told me, they always tell him, we know, that's what Brussels says, but are you from Brussels or are you from Warsaw? Come on, work with us. A lot of the rest of Western Europe, the Germans and the French and the Brits, who are still part of it for a few more days, feel like it's a Chinese attempt to divide and conquer. And I have to say it probably is. China likes to divide, it likes to conquer, it likes to deal, it likes to look for wedges that it can exploit. And again, COVID, we're sort of in a standstill. COVID has led to a standstill. Trade and movement of more so people than goods, but some goods too have been slowed down. Shipping is not entirely normal. Quarantine inspections are severe. China has this idea that frozen food shipments, especially from Europe, may be carrying coronavirus. I think it's less fraught and less heated than it is with the US, but a lot of the same structural things are there. In terms of the Middle East, I think China's policy remains more or less the same. It kind of wants to be on good terms with everyone, and that includes Iran. They sort of see the region, I think, more clearly than a lot of American policymakers do. They understand that the Middle East there are Arabs, there are Persians, there are Turks, and there are Jews, and China kind of wants to be friends with all of them. And I think China is very pleased to see Israel's recent establishment of relations with some Gulf countries. That's the kind of thing they would have advocated all along and must be very happy to see. They're less dependent on the oil than they used to be. I think China wants stability, and I think the biggest difference in China's outlook on the region is that it does not vilify Iran the way the US does, the way Israel does, and the way a lot of Gulf states do. Arab Gulf states. It sees Iran as almost a counterpart, as an ancient civilization, a continental power with a long, continuous history. It's a player, it has its wars, it has its proxy wars, but they don't see it as some sort of uniquely reckless or dangerous player. They just see it as another big player. And they almost see it as something that they see in themselves, a big power with a great history and great scope, and that doesn't get perceived fairly by the world. little bit of this victimization complex, I think, is something they share. So I think the big outlier for China in terms of how a lot of other countries look at that region is their view on Iran, which has it as a much more normal part of the story.
Ted, thank you very, very much. I think it was very interesting. Like always, when I met you, when I have to learn something, I came to you to listen to you. So I learned again today, and I'm sure that the Israeli audience would also enjoy this. I hope that soon we can meet not only in the virtual way, but in Beijing or in Israel, in our home. And the warmest regards from all of us to you,
Thank
to
you.
Roberta, to everybody. Thank you very much. Again, it was our
I've likewise learned from our talks, and I look forward to our next chance to do it in person.
Thank you very much. Regards from Ifat and to Roberta, and thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.